Yeah. So I actually wrote the book in two pretty separate parts, or the first draft in two separate parts. I jotted down like a 1 or 2 page outline, maybe like 2013, not that long after Linsanity, just thinking about those three characters, Juan and Robert and Powerball. So
but let's start. What is Linsanity? Because people listening might be going, "What? I didn't even know."
Oh yeah, it's been a long time now, right? It's like 11 years. So Linsanity was what they called it when the first Asian American and still only Asian American basketball star, Jeremy Lin, went on this like 6-game winning streak in his first 6 starts. So he came off the bench, had like a 20-point game. The Knicks won for the first time in like 2 weeks. They were doing terribly. Everybody was injured. Carmelo Anthony wasn't playing. And Lin was like the 4th point guard off the bench. So he was never playing. And suddenly like a couple of the point guards got injured or something. One, I think, got suspended, and then he got into the game and they won. And so he started the next game and he went off for like 20 something and really dominated the game, and they won again, and it just kept happening. Right. And every time it was like, can this possibly happen again? And it just kept happening. Scored like 36 on Kobe in LA. It hit the game winner. It was really this amazing time. I grew up wanting to be an NBA basketball player. And so for me personally, it felt like this time of great possibility, right? There's that like Kevin Garnett quote where he wins the title. And I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but when he won it, he like screams into the air, anything is possible.
Oh, right. I've seen this clip. It's like it's like a meme now, right?
Yeah, probably, right. So that's how it felt, I think, during Linsanity for me. And then he finally lost, and ESPN ran this like racist headline the next day. There were all these tweets, disparaging him and calling him a fluke, and suddenly, like, it's like the whole rug got pulled out from under the whole thing, and it was just very disappointing. But also like something that was totally expected, but I think a lot of people were just hoping it wouldn't happen. And soon after that, Lin got injured, and then like was trying to re-sign, but the team had this weird thing where they're like telling him in order to get market value, he should start looking elsewhere and get an offer from elsewhere, and they could match it. Right. So he did this, even though he just wanted to stay with the Knicks. And he got this huge offer from Houston that would put New York over its salary cap and cost them a lot of money. And so they decided they weren't going to match it. And he couldn't come back to New York. And at that point, he joined a system that wasn't really right for him. And it all just kind of fell apart a little bit.
So I want to stop you. Yeah. I want to stop you because I think like the interesting parallel, which you sort of touched on in the beginning, is the emotional experience of this for you as a Korean American adoptee who grew up like playing basketball, loving basketball, dreaming of being an NBA star. I don't know how tall you are. I don't know. I mean, was there ever a chance? Was there any hope or no?
No, not really. I've just under 6 foot, but
okay. Yeah, me too. I had I grew up in Indiana. I couldn't even make my high school team. It was competitive, and but I could play a little bit. I could shoot, but I was never athletic enough to really make any noise. And so when Jeremy Lin has this like meteoric ascent and sudden arrival, and it wasn't like, I mean, as I recall it, maybe it's different, but it was truly like he came from out of nowhere. Like, I don't recall there being like a buildup. It was just like suddenly he was there, he was on the court, and he was great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there was, I think if you were an Asian American following basketball, you probably knew who he was, right? I knew who he was. He was kind of big on YouTube, and there were things happening. There was already a documentary being made about him, and then it kind of turned into a Linsanity doc when he went off like that. He had played for Harvard, been all Ivy for like 2 or 3 years, and outscored the opposing guard by quite a bit in the NCAA tournament, but it was Harvard, so they still went out pretty early.
Right.
And then there were these stories about how he had outplayed John Wall in the summer league, but he had been completely undrafted. So he spent, the seasons on the bench, I think maybe 2 seasons on the bench. And then by the time he was playing, it was like, nobody was paying any attention to him at all.
But he made the league as a street free agent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's hard to do.
Yeah. I mean, he had game, right? Like it was pretty obvious once he started playing.
Right. Okay. And so this was what, 2011, you said?
2012.
2012. Okay. And so you kind of that kind of frames it in terms of like the culture and the politics. Like 2012 was like peak Obama, right? It was like he was reelected. This was pre-COVID, pre-Trump, pre-insanity. Not to be confused with Linsanity. But there was like, I think, as you touched on, like an experience for you emotionally and relationally when it comes to this country and your experience of it and the experience of the culture. It was a moment of true optimism for you, right?
Yeah.
Brief, but true.
Definitely. Yes. I felt very optimistic about the country. For sure.
In the sense that maybe things have changed and shifted in a real way. And now this is possible and we'll see more of this.
Right. And then it all fell apart.
It's interesting to me that in a league that is dominated by people of color, at least at the level of the athletes, that the racism towards an Asian American player would be so pronounced and so immediate. Like that headline in ESPN, was that the chink in the armor headline?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It's like so crass. Like, how did that ever get past an editor? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's amazing.
It's usually the editors, right, who make the titles. So
right. Yeah. Well, there you go. But I mean, like, wow, it's just like, dude, like, I
know
they're not even trying to be like sly about it. It's just like brazen and ugly. And so, I don't know. Like, I guess this book really does a nice job of drawing into focus the racial dynamics as they exist for Asian Americans in relation not only to white people and white culture, but also African American culture. There's tension there as well.
Absolutely.
And the kinds of challenges, like racial challenges that Asian Americans face, they're their own thing. Independent and apart from maybe the challenges that, say, African Americans might face. So this book does a really nice job of drawing that. And it's the kind of thing, too, I think, that in the culture maybe doesn't get talked about quite as much, like as the kinds of, the racial tensions felt, and difficulties felt by African Americans. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, man, it's like a black and white country for sure. When people talk about racism, at least. I remember for a while I was working at the Harvard Kennedy School, which is like the school of government for Harvard. And I was organizing this seminar series on inequality. We had these, famous within their field speakers come every week and give this talk about different kinds of inequality. And like Asian Americans never showed up really. And I remember sitting with this, like the one Asian American student being like, are we like, they're never going to talk about us. And he's like, oh yeah. Asian Americans, they don't exist in sociology. And all we could do is joke about it really.
But why do you think that is?
I mean, the inequality is so stark, right, between white folks and black folks. And that's like, you got to start there probably. And the country's kind of built on that inequality. And then the other groups are larger. And then Asian Americans have this weird place within it because there's so many different ethnic groups. And some are like very high performing and some are the lowest economic, rung on the ladder. And so it's very hard to talk about Asian Americans as a group because of that like extreme difference in diversity.
Mm. So Jeremy Lin has this incredible rise and then subsequent fall in the NBA. You start like right away, pretty much start to think of it as a possible narrative for your work. And you jot down this outline. And then now this is 2013, right? So now you fast forward to 2022 or 2023 and the book is coming out. There's a decade in between.
Yeah. Between the idea. Yeah. Yeah. So, but let me tell you, so 2014, maybe. I was in a PhD program at the University of Houston, and I was taking this novel class with Robert Boswell, this pretty amazing teacher. Seemed like a guy who was only thinking about fiction all the time.
Right.
And so this class we were reading 4 novels, but all the beginnings together. And then we read all the middles together and read all the endings together. And I teach a kind of version of this now. And he was giving us these prompts. Each of the novels was in kind of a different form. And we had to write 4 different beginnings to the same novel, 4 different middles to the same novel, and 4 different endings to the same novel. It's a really fun class. And Boz would write these prompts that were like 13 pages long. And we were supposed to write 5 pages. Like the prompts were enormous. And they just had so many different ways you could go off with them. And so I wrote maybe 70 something pages about one story just using these prompts, and so at the end of it, I had a beginning, middle, and end to a novel, possibly. I remember asking Boz, like, okay, so like now what do I do? Right? Like there's no more prompts. You got to like give me the prompts for the in-between stuff.
Yeah, right.
And he was like, just connect the 3 parts. I remember thinking, like, sounds like no fun at all. Right? Like I just wrote the meatiest parts, and I don't really want to just write filler in the middle to connect them. So I put it aside, maybe like 2016 or something. 2017, my wife was diagnosed with cancer right at the beginning of 2017. She gave birth to our second child in 2016, and she had this like morning sickness. Well, we thought it was morning sickness all through the pregnancy. Was losing weight instead of gaining weight, and we were just kind of waiting for her to give birth. And we thought finally, then she'll be okay, but it just kept going. And so, like a month or 2 after that, she went to the doctor, and they diagnosed her with stage 4 stomach cancer. And I was spending a lot of time with her, going up and down from Busan to Seoul to get cancer chemo treatments. And most of the time, she was just in so much pain that it was like me sitting beside her bed while she slept. Right? Like the best thing she could do was sleep, because then she wouldn't be in pain. In this like super hot ward, because cancer patients get really cold, full of all these women with stomach cancer, of all ages. And I had to do something. I was listening to audiobooks, reading, but I remembered I had this novel. So I thought maybe I'll just, write a new novel. And so I read it over, and I thought I'll just fill in the middle. But after I read it again, I still thought the same thing. Like it doesn't seem fun to write the middle parts. So actually I emailed Boz, and I said, Boz, can you send me all those prompts from like, 3 years ago or something? And he very graciously just sent me all of the prompts that he had. He must have kept them somewhere. And I wrote another beginning, middle, and end to the same novel, but from a different perspective. So from Carrie Kong's perspective, who's the second perspective character in the novel.
She is Wan Lee, your protagonist, the basketball player, the sort of proxy for Jeremy Lin. Just so listeners are oriented, Wan Lee has a romantic relationship going with Carrie, who is this producer. She produces television.
Yeah, so she produces TV and movies, and what she's working on in the book is K-drama, right? So now pretty popular, but at the time, really not many people outside of maybe Koreans and kind of other Asian diaspora people were watching it here. And she wants to bring K-drama to America. So I was writing about I was writing also about her sister in the book has stage 4 stomach cancer. And so I was kind of writing about my experiences in the ward, and also the ways in which my wife and I were turning to this other kind of narrative in which, people don't really have a lot of power over their lives, and what happens to them is kind of fated or miraculous or coincidental. And what we really needed at that time was a miracle. Like there was nothing we could do about cancer. Right? It was just like either it's cured or it's not cured. And my wife was turning to religion. She got very religious during this time, and I guess was turning to K-drama. And so I was writing the second part of the book by her bedside. And I also happened to have a few ideas for K-drama that I thought would be good shows. And I thought, now's the time I can use them. And so I threw those in there too. And at the end of it, I had like 150 pages, right? They were just a mess, but it was in almost like two different novels telling the same story. And so I tried to like jam them together. It was like two blocks or like a block in a hole. And I was trying to like push them together, but they weren't the right shape. So I spent a long time just trying to figure out what the shape was that would let them connect, and revising a lot to try to get it to that point. I think the parts now are like, there's 3 of one's parts, 2 of Carrie's, and then 2 K-drama parts. And eventually I was able to figure out a way, I hope, of making it all work together.
Definitely. Like this feels like it feels to me like, as I was reading and like reading from maybe a writerly perspective, it felt like the challenge of this book and the success of this book had to do with finding a way to meld K-drama with sports drama. I believe that, those are the 2 big ones. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but finding a way to have those things operate in relation to one another narratively. So I guess like a question is, like, how did you get to the point where you knew it was working? Just trial and error over and over again? Like at what point did the pieces click into place? Was there something that you found was like the linchpin of it that made it all kind of make sense? Or was it just kind of a slog and you eventually got to a point where you felt it was as good as it was going to get? And then you just, like, this is the way I feel about my books. Like, I'm just like, well, there's not much more I can do here. Time
to let go.
Time to let go. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of both. The K-drama ended up being the piece that helped me to put it together, right? As I was trying to think, like, what do these things have in common, other than racism, right? And like representation. It was like the ways that stories work, right? Insanity seems to happen out of nowhere, not because Lynn didn't have the talent, but because people weren't giving him a chance, right? It was a kind of outside power that had to decide whether or not he could play, and outside coincidence that gave him the opportunity to play. And in the world of K-drama, like I was saying before, right, so much of it is kind of outside of the character's hands. I think right around the time when I started Carrie's sections, my wife and I had watched these like maybe 3 or 4 dramas in a row, each of which started with the 2 romantic leads, like 1,000 years in the past, having a bad fate, like coming to ruin. And then they would flash into the present and they'd be like reborn, and the same bodies, because they're actors, right? And they had the same love story, but the same kinds of bad things were happening to them over in the present now. And it would be like 15 episodes of living exactly the same life again. And then like 1 episode where they've finally done something enough to like break them out of this fate. And that, I don't know, that felt like I don't think it's so different from Linsanity, that story, or One Story, or, the story of a lot of people who have to kind of survive in a country where they don't have a lot of agency. And so that became the kind of linchpin in a way. I put the K-drama straight into the book, and I used them as ways to kind of teach readers how to read the larger stories of these 2 characters.
Okay, yeah. And you say, I think there's a line in the book where you say, unlike in Hollywood, in Korea, plot happens because of who people are, not because of what they choose. Like, there are certain laws and rules to the way that K-drama unfolds, which you do a nice job of spelling out in the book. And something that I was impressed with is the fact that you kind of bring, say, like a Western reader along, or somebody like me who doesn't know much about K-drama. You have to orient that reader, or you choose to orient that reader, and you do a nice job of it without slowing down the narrative momentum, because I think that's a risk that you would be taking, because you start to get into explanatory or expository mode in a novel. I think you risk getting boring or making people sort of pull away because they're like, well, where's the action? Can you talk a little bit about navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a hard thing. Sometimes I feel like it's the hardest thing, and I know it's something, maybe the major thing that my students have trouble with too is like where to put the information, how to divvy out the information. And I'm always telling them, like put it where it puts the most pressure on the present story. And I think that helps, that it doesn't feel like information anymore. It just feels like context to make whatever's happening even more dramatic. And I think that helps kind of make it feel propulsive. Even the information feels propulsive then. But yeah, to think about like why I was explaining it. So Carrie's trying to bring K-drama to America, right? And so for her dream kind of relies on bringing a format that Koreans are very familiar with, and that relies a lot on tropes and things that you see a lot of in K-drama to an American audience that maybe there's some kind of Asian Americans who are familiar with it, but for most Asian Americans probably are not familiar with this kind of story. And so she's got to introduce all of these tropes in order to make it more fun to watch the shows, right? Like if you kind of don't know that body swapping is a trope and you're watching a body swapping drama, it seems like it's kind of a weird thing, and you're not catching the jokes that are kind of based on people knowing that this happens a lot in dramas.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know like your history with K-drama. Am I correct in saying that there's been a bit of a shift over the decades since you first wrote the outline, like from Linsanity to now? There has been a shift in terms of Korean popular culture finding its way into American popular culture.
Yeah, right? Huge shift. I mean, when I grew up, I didn't know what kimchi was. Like I'd never seen a Korean movie, never heard Korean music. My parents had never seen any or heard any of that. There were no Korean restaurants. I never had Korean food, right?
You were raised by white parents?
Mm-hmm, yeah, right. So I was adopted when I was 2. Grew up in Connecticut. And now, right, like you could go to almost any town, even smaller towns in America, and you'll be able to find Korean food somewhere, like kimchi in an Asian market. And you probably have heard of BTS, right? And Squid Game. Right?
Squid Game, yeah. I've heard of that. So, and then there was the movie. Was the movie? I think.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the name, of course, but like it won
Parasite.
the Oscar. Yeah, Parasite. Right.
Yeah.
So there's examples, and I'm wondering, like, when did you start getting in? Was it in Korea when your wife was sick? Was that when you started to like watch K-drama?
No, it was. So I went to Korea when I was 23, maybe 23, 24, for the first time since my adoption. And when I was there, I couldn't watch American TV because there was none really, except for Sex and the City. I watched a lot of Sex and the City because it was like the only show they had on there.
Right.
And then I was, watching shows with my wife and trying to figure out how we could watch things with subtitles, go to DVD rooms or whatever. And so I watched my first K-drama there. I think it was You're Beautiful, which is about these twins, one who's a boy and one who's a girl. And the boy joins this boy group, but he is getting surgery or something in America, and so he can't actually be there. And so his sister, who's trying to become a nun, stands in for him until he can come and join the group. And all the boys in the boy group fall in love with her at varying stages and kind of varying levels of knowledge. And she ends up with the lead singer. And it was so propulsive, right? Like even when I was not really wanting to enjoy watching it, I couldn't stop watching it. And so I was kind of hooked from there on, and have been watching K-drama ever since. So I don't know, like 15 years, maybe 16 years.
I feel like it's very like your awakening to K-drama probably is tied to the writing, not only of this book, but also of Craft in the Real World.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to have been like, wow, because like these modes of storytelling, and we see it, we see it when we watch foreign cinema, for example, or what do you call it? International cinema, I think is the term. Or when you read books that are in translation or whatever. Yeah. It's important to do that because you're suddenly like made aware of the fact that, especially for people who grew up in the age of like all of us now, television and cinema, Hollywood cinema, it's very easy to be persuaded or to think that there's just this mode of storytelling that, our entertainment culture churns out, and this is the way to do it. And these are the tropes, and these are the, genres and everything else. But then you
Marvel
spend
movies.
Yeah, well, but then you spend some time overseas, and you sort of, it forces your hand a little bit. Like you said, it's Sex in the City or subtitles and some K-drama.
No, absolutely. One of the first movies I saw in Korea was this movie, The King and the Clown. And the first half of the drama, it's about a court jester or jester. And the first half of the drama is this, like, it's just as a jester being funny, right? It's like it's a comedy. And then halfway through, he enters the king's court, and then it just becomes like a total tragedy. And I remember thinking, what the hell is going on here? I never seen something completely change genres halfway through the movie. And now I see that all the time because I'm watching a lot of Korean cinema. But the first time I saw it, I thought it was like a totally new thing and like a completely experimental thing. And I just didn't realize that this is just like a thing that happens in other places, right?
Well, it's interesting. Now that you're talking, I'm thinking about, I'm like formulating a theory on the fly where I'm like, maybe the more miserable and toxic American culture becomes, especially like at the political level, but like just like in the economics, post-capital or late capitalism, all that kind of stuff. Maybe the more toxic it becomes, the more appetite we will have for other narratives. Just because I'm thinking of like how the Banshees of Inisherin is like this big, to do this season. Like that's a film from another place that a lot of people are like hanging on to. And I watched it, and I think what was sort of lovely about it is that it wasn't here. Like it's like this beautiful Irish coast, even though it's like, hard scrabble and difficult and kind of like the conditions can be brutal. I was like, this is just lovely, even though this is this guy's cutting his fingers off or whatever. So,
yeah. A little extreme.
Yeah, I don't know. But maybe there's something to that, maybe there's something to that we would look outwards maybe more if things here at home are unsatisfactory, and maybe there could be benefits from that, derived from that. But I don't know. I just came up with it 30 seconds ago, so I don't. I think we'd have to
post it on Twitter now and
test it out.
Bring the haters.
So, did you in like being exposed to K-drama and sort of, I guess, sort of like binging on it, right? Suddenly, if this is all you've got, then suddenly you're on this steady diet. Did you then turn maybe to other forms of narrative or cultural traditions in storytelling? Like, I'm curious to know like what the hybrid might be or what the mix might be at this point in terms of your influences.
Yeah, so K-drama definitely a big influence. Sometimes I joke, but also it's serious that I wrote this book so that I could say that I was researching K-drama when I was watching it and get away with it. But also I read a lot of Japanese literature, especially. Something about those stories really talks to me and the way that I see the world. I read a lot of books in translation in general, but also a lot of Asian American literature. Most of the time when I'm reading American lit, it's Asian American lit, and thinking about it within that tradition, which is like, has some touchstones with foreign literature or Asian literature, but is really its kind of own thing now.
Yeah, I love when I'm reading stuff in translation, and it's really good. It gives me, I have a special like reverence for good translators.
Yeah,
like people who do that work are so unsung. I'm always so careful to make sure to like name check them and call them out when I have a writer on the show whose book is in translation, because what will we do without these people?
It sucks when they don't have their name on the cover too. I always feel so bad for them.
Yeah, and that's like that's its own art form. It's not simple to do. When it's done well, you really recognize it. And conversely, I feel like sometimes I'll read a translation where it's not done so well, and it leaves me with this feeling of wonder, of like wondering what I'm missing. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's hard because you can't tell whether it's like in the original too, or if it's just the translation.
Yeah. And then I guess like maybe there's also the question if it's really good, if the translation has somehow elevated the original. I guess that's possible too. But every time I read a book in translation, I tell myself I should be doing more of this. It's sort of the point. But so there's something about Juan Lee's story that struck me. And I think it's a quote from him in the book where he says, it was right about the time that he got on the court for the first time. Like the Knicks put him on the court because of all these injuries to the players who were in front of him. And he said something to the effect of, I did what I always do, which is I played as if my life depended on each play. That really hit me. I think it's true to life. I think it's true to like minority experience in the States in terms of like the stakes of failure or success. I don't know. It packed an emotional punch for me to read that. It made me maybe think about my own privilege and whether or not I do anything with that sense of that sense of like life or death, like that scale attached to it.
Yeah, when you only have a few opportunities, right? Each one counts for so much. Yeah, I was just talking to somebody, and they were saying they had been talking to like a showrunner for like a Muslim American show, and the showrunner was saying, "I just want to be able to fail and still get money thrown at me, just like any white showrunner would." And right, I just want to be able to fail. I think there's something to that for sure. It's hard to fail when you have so few chances because each failure seems like it's going to end everything. You always have this sense, I think, sometimes living as somebody so disempowered that like any fuck up you make is going to bring your whole life crashing down.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too if Jeremy Lin has received a copy of this book. Do you know if he's read it?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, it'd be great, I guess.
But you haven't like tried to get him a copy or anything like that.
I haven't. I don't know him personally, sadly.
Oh, okay. I feel like you guys should
We're working out together.
Just shooting hoops at the Y, you know.
It's like pressing 200. I'm pressing 20.
What is he up to today? Do you know?
I think he's playing abroad.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Which that I feel like that in the sport has grown. I have a buddy who played college ball and then played in Europe for like a decade and Asia. He was all over the place, but he made a great living. Got to travel with his young family. Like, I don't know. It's just like, it seemed like a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah. It sounds nice. Though I think on the other hand, right, like there's so many games, you probably don't get to see your kids as much as you want.
Right. So was there any, I mean, obviously the K-drama, you kind of learned by binging on it, sort of picked up a lot. But I'm also impressed at the level of prose in this book when it comes to your depictions of the sport of basketball.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's well done, you know, and this stuff isn't always super simple to write about. It's obviously a very physical thing, and you've got to bring people in who might not have any like orientation to the sport, you know. The same thing with K-drama. Like you're really having to bring people along and make it clear to them, even if they don't know a thing about it. You talk about that challenge and like how you, like, did you have to do research, or was like your fandom and your playing of the game as a kid enough to you know, carry you through?
Yeah, I didn't really have to do any research per se. I just tried to focus on the things that you can kind of feel on the court, which is like the momentum and the tension and like the way that things shift, like in the physical feeling of that, and trying to capture that instead of like how somebody dribbles the ball or right, like who passes to whom, and the kind of technically what is happening on the court part of it. I think when you're watching basketball and you've seen it, you know, you've been watching it for a very long time, what's interesting is like the way that the energy flows. You know, like you can almost tell when somebody's going to go, when one team's going to go on a streak, and when that streak is dying down, and how the kind of the lead will change, and the ways in which the other things that are happening are affecting the score or outcome of the game.
It's interesting that you say that, because I watch an NBA game and you'll see a team go up by like 15 or 20 points. And almost always the team that's behind will then make a run. just because I think the team that's up maybe lets off the gas a little bit. And there are these natural, unlike predictable fluctuations of energy to at least a professional basketball game that I feel like you see in almost every game. You know, very rare.
I watch a lot of like variety shows, Korean variety shows, and I'm always surprised like how often the games will come down to the very last go. I mean, sometimes they're just like messing with the score. They're like, okay, this last game will call, you know, you'll get 10,000 points if you win this last game, and it's been like 10 points the entire time.
Right.
But like we have this kind of natural feeling. I think you're right. To like, if you're far in the lead, you think, okay, I can let up a little bit. And if you're way behind, you're like, crap, I got to do something now.
Yeah. Have you, like, now that you've moved to New York, have you been going to Knicks games at all? Have you gotten to go?
I haven't gotten to go. I would love to go, but I have to bring my kids, and I think they would get bored fast.
Yeah. But I feel like, you know, because I had this like dream. I was like, I'm going to bring my family to a Dodgers game. I was like, I'm a dad. We're going to go to a baseball game in America. You know, that whole thing.
Eat some hot dogs.
Yeah, or just whatever, you know. And like we go there, and it was such a fail because the game is so slow.
So slow, yeah.
It's sitting
even slower now.
Yeah, we were sitting far from. I mean, you're always sitting far from the field, but it was just like they were bored out of their minds. They didn't have any idea what was going on. I couldn't really enjoy the game. And then conversely, like going to an NBA game, I feel like because the action is quicker, that it's a little bit easier for them to get into. But there were also, I think we went to a Clippers game. This was years ago, but there was like a laser light show.
Oh, okay.
And like the music that plays at like commercial breaks and stuff.
Yeah.
That was enough. That wasn't the game. It was that stuff that they were like, yes, you know. So,
yes, the game is finally over.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I remember as a kid thinking like the most fun were soccer and hockey to go to and actually like sit there, even though I like football and basketball much more, playing and watching it on TV.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I'll have to try again. I was so scarred from the Dodger game that I think I was just like, well, we'll press pause on this for like another 8 years. wait until they understand the game at least a little bit. But
no, they're never going to want to watch it anyway, though, because you've traumatized them.
I mean, honestly, like there's such like the things that I get excited about, like as a sports fan, have yet to fully carry over to either of my kids.
Just as a person.
I think they might not be into it, and I've got to accept that. But like when you're a sports fan and like the game's on, like you just want like, hey, watch this, you know, like, and nobody in my family gives a shit. So I want to talk to you a little bit about like what's been going on with you, because we've talked on this show multiple times now, and I feel like that's like sort of a check-in. You know, you've been through so much over the past decade, creatively, personally, and otherwise. And you've also bounced around a lot. Like you're in New York now.
I am.
You're teaching at Columbia. This is a relatively new development.
Yeah, it's very new. So I started in the fall. I was in Oklahoma for a hot minute, and then before that in Iowa for 4 years. Yeah, it just happened. I actually did no intention to leave after 1 year in Oklahoma. A Columbia job came up, and I thought, well, I never see Columbia jobs come up, so might as well just shoot my shot. And then I had no marketing power because I had applied to nothing.
Right.
But I'm here, and it's great to be here for sure. I really felt. I remember driving the kids across the country to come back here, and passing. It was like the trees changed, you know, like the landscape changed, and I felt suddenly like, I actually have been away from what makes me feel like a normal person for so long.
Right. Well, I mean, just from your upbringing in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Had you lived in New York before?
No, I haven't lived in New York before. I actually thought before that I would hate living in New York just because it's so tiring when you visit. It's like a lot of fun, but then I always felt like on the train out or the bus out back to Boston or wherever, like, thank God I'm out of there. Right. Mm. Like, it's fun, but I don't want to like stay there forever.
Right.
But I've found living here, it's much less hectic. There's like a very community-based, neighborhoody feel. And like we barely leave like the 10-block radius where my kid's school is, and you know, restaurants are all around. We just go grocery shopping in the grocery store at the bottom of the building. It's great.
That's awesome. Or right there by Columbia. Is that where you live? Like uptown or whatever?
Yep.
Well, I'll tell you, I almost jumped. I literally like probably let out a whoop or something when I saw that you had gotten that job. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you so much.
That's a great break. And I mean, nothing against Iowa or Oklahoma, but I feel like this is like a better option or something.
yeah, it's a better option for sure.
Yeah, right.
I don't think anybody's going to take offense to that.
No, I'm just trying to be.
You're going to get trolled on Twitter for that one too.
Just trying to be judicious here, but Columbia is a great job, great place to be teaching, and you've been really industrious, publishing books, getting work done, getting your PhD, getting all this stuff against the backdrop of incredible stress and the loss of your wife, and then having to be a single parent. So just a salute for getting there and getting this book out into the world. I think so many of us struggle to write books under the burden of far less.
Well, it's still definitely a struggle for sure. Right? It's hard. It's a hard thing. I feel like anybody who writes a book should feel proud of it. But thank you so much for saying that. It means a lot. And
without getting, you don't have to get too deep into the weeds, but how are you doing? Like personally, it's some time has gone by. I know obviously that the grief never goes away, but you and your kids are doing all right.
We're doing pretty good. The kids have a school finally that they like. That has been not really the case for a long time. And, they seem to like the city. We're just adjusting, trying to live that big city life or whatever.
Yeah, you get options. I mean, there's so much to do in New York. It's like, but I feel like it's sort of like living in Los Angeles where people are like, you must go to the beach all the time. And it's like, probably not as much as you would think unless you live on the West Side. But I mean, there's like all these museums in the park and this, that, and the other. Like, do you get to do some of that fun stuff with them?
Yeah, we go to the park a lot. I think it's different just because you don't have to drive here, right? So you're just kind of walking. If I had to drive everywhere, I don't know if we would go to anywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we're, 12 blocks from Central Park. So we walk to the park a lot and go to a bunch of playgrounds. I mean, the number of playgrounds, right? Like that was the first thing my son was into. He was just like, there's so many playgrounds here. I love New York.
That's all. And that's cool that they get to grow up there, I feel like.
Yeah.
I always felt, I've said this before in the show, but I had a friend in college who was raised in Manhattan. And that was the first person I think I'd met who was raised in New York City. And I felt like he was way ahead of me. Like,
In what way? In what way?
Well, it was like I was in college and I was kind of going nuts. And he was like, I dropped acid in 9th grade and committed arson. He's like, I'm over it. He was sort of
So he was jaded.
Yeah, he was just.
You were like, man, I wish I could be jaded like you.
He was mature in a weird. He was calmer and more mature and had his shit more together in college because he had been exposed to all of the things that were brand new to me at the age of 18. Like he'd been there 4 or 5 years ahead of me.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I'm just happy for you. I feel like it's a good break, and if anybody deserved one, it's you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And so you then, prior to this book, released Craft in the Real World, which I feel like was kind of a career shift as well. That book had a really great reception and maybe opened up opportunities to you. Do you think? I mean, it probably helped.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did that help? That help you get the job?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. And what about the ways in which you learned from the writing of that book? Like we always learn from the books that we write. And I have to imagine it's you sort of defining how you want to teach to yourself, but it's also you maybe opening up avenues and defining the way that you want to tell stories to others, right? Like that book must have been a great education.
Yeah, actually, oddly, I think it was kind of the other way around. I was learning so much from writing fiction and from teaching, and just wrote the book to try to put those things down because it seemed like they could help other people I actually think like it would be nice to write a book, I guess, like kind of setting out things you want to do in the future. But this was just kind of like summing up what I was doing and had done in the past. A lot of the discoveries, or all the discoveries, kind of came from the doing, and then were just kind of jotted down in the book. Like the different kinds of stories in this novel, and then in my last novel, I struggled a lot trying to figure out how to tell those stories. And then I was just kind of describing what I had learned from that process in Graft in the Real World. But I just felt like, actually, I still feel like I wouldn't have written that book if I hadn't felt like somebody would benefit from it. And it didn't seem like there should be books like it out there. I'd be much happier just writing novels about K-drama.
Right. Well, so I'm curious, did that book have was it contracted, or did you write it and then sell it?
So we sold it on a outline. So like on a proposal, right? But I had written most of it already, just as like blog posts and essays and things to try to help the teaching community. And
the response has been great. I know I catch it, on Twitter and stuff like that. But how, have you noticed really big shifts, and have you gotten a lot of feedback on it from people who are like, thank God, that somebody said this and put this in a book?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel similarly like that, right? That it's an object. It's like it offers some kind of authority to the things that they've been wanting, programs to do, or, classrooms to kind of acknowledge and talk about. And so now they have like a thing they can point to and say, right, like this, look, you can see it here, what I've been talking about. It's somebody wrote a book about it. So I'm glad to see that it's like offered some kind of feeling to them that they are like confirmed in their, and what it seems sometimes like it's just like a lonely feeling.
Right. So to get back to the sense of wonder, something that I really admire about it is how efficient it is. This isn't like a super long book. I'm tempted to make comparisons that have to do with like sport, like it's muscular, it's lean, you know what I'm saying? But it is that. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of wasted motion in this book. And I think a lot of the reviews that I've read and the blurbs and stuff, they make note of that. Like, this is really kinetic, and the prose feels, I don't know, I just love it. It's just, it feels really beautifully rendered, and it feels like you did the work. This is how I always feel whenever I read a book with this effect, where you're not relying on the reader to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. You've done it. It's just what's necessary is there and nothing else. And I'm wondering if in the writing of the book, you went way longer in earlier drafts and then had to pare away, or if you're a writer who edits as you go, which I think is another way to do it, where you're just sitting there noodling with the same sentence 50 million times until you finally get it down.
Yeah, a little bit of both, actually. I used to be much more a writer who noodled with it as I went. But then I kind of realized I was just changing it to almost exactly the same version of the sentence, and it took me 30 minutes to write a sentence. Right? It'd be 5 words had possibly been changed to synonyms in a 30-word sentence, and right, it didn't seem worth it.
Right.
And so I still do that, but I try not to. But so actually the first draft, as I mentioned, was pretty short, and even the first draft of each section was shorter than the book. But I kind of had this. I did this revision month a really long time ago, and one of the writers was talking about revision as an accordion. And I like that kind of image of it. For me, it often starts small, but then as I revise, I'm expanding the breadth, and then I'm paring it back down, and it keeps going back in and out until I've got the music right.
Yeah, hearing you talk, I'm thinking I've been working on a new book, and I'm 15,000 words into it or so, and I've been working on this opening section for 4 or 5 months. 15,000 words. It seems like I should be moving faster. And I think it's because I edit as I go. Like I will reread the entire thing every time I sit down, and I will fuck with it over and over and over again. I think the upside is that when it's done, it's usually pretty close to done, because it's just received hundreds of reads. The downside is that I'm probably, like you say, taking it's like a circular path in a lot of senses. Like you're noodling and noodling and noodling. You're probably winding up in a lot of cases close to where you started.
Yeah.
So I'm often thinking to myself, like, is there a more efficient way to be doing this? Am I just being a fool here? And like,
I think that all the time.
Yeah, but I guess everybody's got to do it the way they've got to do it.
I think a lot about like the kind of planners too, right? People who plan out their entire novel. I always think that must be way more efficient. But I tried it recently, and I wrote a whole draft, and it only covered like the first two things in the plan. And at the end of it, I was like, I need to stop.
Yeah.
I was like, I've written like 200 pages. I'm just going to stop here. And so I never got to any of the rest of the plan. But also, like, I found that I would do that editing, but then also do a ton of revision on the backside. And so by the time I revised it, all of the words that I'd spent so long trying to get right, they were all gone. You know, like I ended up cutting out all those 15,000 words, and then I'd spent so long getting them right, and they weren't even in the book.
I look forward to that painful fixation. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, you talk about planning, because it's like, I feel like everything I do is backwards. It's like I do eventually get to a plan, but by the time I do, it's towards the end of the process. And then it's kind of like a reverse engineering. You're sort of applying the plan to your book to the big mess that you've made with this long draft that you thought was like a final draft, and turns out to be nothing of the sort.
Yeah, I do that too. I think it's pretty helpful with structure in the back end. I think trying to like write down all the things that you already did unconsciously, and then try to figure out how to order them in a way that'll be more helpful to the book. I think that's really helpful.
It's nice too, those late stages when you feel like it's clicking into place, and that's the best part, I think. Or maybe like it's like the most emotionally enjoyable. I mean, you can have a good day at any stage of the process, but it's nice when you feel like you know where everything goes, or you have a real sense of an ending. And I don't know. I can imagine you had that sensation with this book, especially because of the layered narrative and the interlocking, like the really explicitly interlocking nature of like the K-drama thing and the sports drama thing, and the challenges that posed. It must have been nice when you finally like felt like you had it.
At the end, it's nice for sure. I mean, the best part sometimes is like you've finished the book, but it's not even close to coming out, right? It just exists as a thing that will eventually be published. I like that part before the press stuff starts.
Right.
But I also, I get a lot of frustration from when I feel like I know things are in the right places, but I have to, improve the things that are there. Because then when I start changing them, I also feel like I need to move them around, and they don't fit as well. Right. So that I like it when everything's so messy, after that first draft or two. Everything's so messy, you can just move things anywhere. It's just like so full of possibility. You can just do anything with it, and it won't matter because it's all bad.
Right. Feel empowered by the shittiness of the draft.
Yeah.
So what about writing across gender? Because you do that. This is a multiple POV book, as you talked about earlier, and you're writing from Juan's perspective. You're also writing from Carrie, his love interest's perspective. And that's something that I've never done. Is I have never written from a female POV, and I have to cop to it. I'm scared. I think I've thought of it, and I'm like, oh, I feel like that could be like a minefield. Like, how did you?
Oh yeah, scary as hell.
How did you do that? Like, were there any like lessons learned or like rules that you followed that helped you?
I thought a lot about how power works differently, and the just living in this life, right? You think a lot about how you come up against power, but other people of other genders or whatever come up against power so differently. So a lot of what I was trying to do was to figure out how living in the same world, but having it be a kind of different world would then affect the ways in which Carrie felt possible to live within that world. And I hope I got it right, but I'm sure I fucked up somewhere.
I don't know. I bought it. You know.
Thanks.
Yeah, you sold me. I was like,
reader.
It's fine. Don't listen to anybody. It's fine. So what about like, I always ask people if you're working on anything new. Like, I know that sometimes you're just kind of done for a bit and you're recharging your batteries, but you seem pretty industrious. Is there another book in the works?
I don't like to sit on my hands. So I've got an essay collection coming out supposedly next year, but definitely not next year. I just told my editor the other day in front of a bunch of other people that I wasn't good. Especially like if she wanted to beat me up, she couldn't. That I probably wasn't going to get there on time. But then I wrote while I was in Oklahoma for a year. I wrote the draft of another novel, first draft about a revenge cult, an Asian American revenge cult that kind of takes revenge on people who've done various wrongs against Asian Americans over the last 100 years or so. And I tried revising it in the I don't know, fall, I guess, and it failed miserably. So I put it aside for a little while, but I hope to get back to it soon.
Do you know why it failed?
No, not really. I think I just wasn't ready for the book, and which is the kind of, it tends to take me a really long time between starting a book and publishing it, and which was fine before because I had just projects going and I could just work on a different project. But now that I only have this one, I feel bereft. I just kind of have to wait now until I can actually work on this thing.
But that awareness feels like a kind of wisdom. I think maybe in an earlier stage of your career, if you were in that position, you might personalize it more. Like, this is a personal failure. But the way that you phrase it, like, I'm not ready for the book yet, it feels like the perspective that you get to once you've written a bunch of books. Sometimes it just takes a minute. And sometimes you need to I found anyway that sometimes I'll just need to, I call it eating. I need to eat more. Which usually means I need to read more, I need to, or you have some sort of life experience that will find its way into the plot and it'll suddenly unlock a bunch of stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's just, some of it's just serendipity and the stuff of life and letting time sort of work its weird magic.
Margot Livesey used to call it filling up. I think of it that way. You empty yourself out all the time, right? And if you're doing a good job, you empty yourself out and you got to fill up again. You got to eat.
And you also, sometimes it's a matter of distance too. You can't see it clearly. You're too close to it. You go away for a little bit, you come back, and suddenly it's in sharper focus or something. But
that didn't stop me from writing the same 10,000 words over and over again for 3 months in the fall.
No, but that's I gotta believe that's part of it. One of the things
that's part of it.
One of the things that's so crazy and crazy making about writing is how you can be in kind of a creative fever and you can, write 10 or 20 or 30 or, even an entire book. And you could feel so good about it in certain moments. And then there's that dawning realization that it's not right.
Yeah.
The way you fool yourself, I think even with experience, it's easy to get caught up in it and, to believe your own lies or something, but you have to go through that. You have to kind of weather those storms. And it's interesting to me, when you eventually get to the place where the thing starts to get done, it's always this interesting question between have I just worn myself out? And is this just me surrendering? Or have I really arrived at a place where it's clicked? You know what I'm saying? I guess it's some combination.
Yeah. I think that must make us better people though, right? It's gotta be good for us to acknowledge our failure. I think so many people don't want to acknowledge their failures at all. And at least we have this one field where we just have to. We have to acknowledge our failures, right?
I don't listen to literary podcasts because I think I would go insane if I did, because I'm doing one, all the time. But I listen to a lot of interview podcasts. I love interviews, and I listen to interviews with artists in other mediums, a lot of times. And it'd be like celebrities talking about trying to write their memoir or something, or, it'll be some like bro podcast or something, and they'll be talking about writing a book. And what I always note is how consistently people say what uniquely utter hell writing a book is. Compared to, say, like, putting together a comedy set or, acting in a movie or something like that. Like, we have given ourselves a task that I think is universally agreed upon to be incredibly difficult and humbling and isolating.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything. I'm just saying, like, I think in point of fact, like, writing books is really fucking hard. And
yeah, it's hard.
You ever sit around going like, what is it about me and about us, like what is it like psychologically and emotionally that makes punishment. Us right? Like, are we masochists? Is that what it is? Yeah,
broken.
Or like, let's flip this a little bit and make ourselves look better. Do we have a high pain tolerance?
I have a very low pain tolerance.
But I'm talking.
You can poke me with your fingernail, and I'd be like, "Holy shit, that hurt."
I'm talking about a specific kind of pain, though.
Emotional,
like living with not only the failure, like the humbling that it takes to, that you repeatedly get when you're trying to write a book, but also the uncertainty. I think that's maybe the hardest part.
Yeah.
For me, in some respects, is that like feeling of like, oh my God, I've been at this for 6 months. Like, is it all for naught? Or why am I doing this anyway? If only 100 people are probably going to read it, or, all the different ways we sort of torture ourselves. But you have to become adept, at least to some extent, at living with that and just kind of, I don't know, coexisting with it if you're going to do this for a career, or just like, if you're going to make books consistently, that's got to become, you got to make friends with that on some level, right?
Or bedmates? I don't know.
Right.
Frenemies?
It's my shadow self. I don't know.
Frenemies with benefits?
Very limited usually, but yeah, maybe some benefits. And I do think, kidding aside, I do think that maybe that's what, that has to be what keeps us going, because there are, I think, real psychological and even emotional benefits to doing this work. It does enrich you, right? We wouldn't do it otherwise. Why would we put ourselves through this if we weren't getting something out of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. What are we getting out of it?
What are you getting out of it?
I don't know. Control? I often think we're just control freaks, right? That's why the uncertainty is so hard. It's like we're trading uncertainty for being able to control all of the little parts, right? Why don't we write for TV, or why don't we do something more collaborative? Because it would drive me wild to have other people be able to do the things that I just want to take over for myself. But of course, right, I don't know if that's not really what I'm getting out of it, though. It's definitely something that helps me feel like I have some aspect of control in a world where I don't have as much control as I often wish I had.
Yeah.
What am I getting out of it? I don't know.
Well, I think that writers in general, like academics, bookish people, the culture sort of characterizes or makes a caricature of such people as being like brainy, right? Smart people, nerds, who are writing books and reading books a lot. And I think there's some truth to that. But like, from my own personal perspective, I think that I would assess my own intelligence as being very middle of the road. And I feel like I'm more confused than the average person, or maybe more aware of my own confusion, which I guess is a form of maybe intelligence. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
totally intelligence.
I don't feel like I've got anything mastered. I feel lost. And that's why I'm turning to books and writing, is to try to make sense of something, like maybe to have control over it in a world that's chaotic and often like difficult and miserable. And it gives you a kind of refuge, but it's also like a form of emotional processing for me. And I do feel like after the completion of a project, especially like my last book, like there was this sense of like, okay, like I did as much as I could with that. Like I chewed on it. I tried to make it make sense, and I did learn something. And I do feel a sense of kind of leaving it behind as much as one can. Like with the sense of wonder, K-drama, the Jeremy Lin thing, your relationship to American culture in that time, or let just for the sake of simplicity, like over the past decade or whatever, you feel a similar sense or any kind of similar sense of, I don't know, having processed it and gotten to a place where you at least maybe reached some level of understanding, and now you can sort of shed that skin and move on to something else?
I wouldn't say so for me, but what you're saying earlier about like being aware that you're confused, I think that's really important, actually, and is something we get from books and from writing, right? Just like the world is fucking mysterious and uncertain and like sometimes horrible, and often feels like it's totally out of your control, and it's like you're stepping into the abyss all the time. I don't think I could do that if I didn't have books.
Yeah. It makes me now, I'm circling back to that thing about, there's a line in the book, I think K-drama shines in the tension between certainty and wonder. And unlike in Hollywood, in Korea, plot happens because of who people are and not what they choose. And I think your book and K-drama, even though I have to cop to not being fluent in K-drama, outside of, I guess, what you've introduced me to, is that maybe Korean culture and other cultures in the world are maybe a little bit more attuned to that mystery and that magic, and I don't know, I guess like you kind of get some of it sometimes in American cinema and television culture, but maybe not to the same degree of intensity. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Just like,
yeah,
like that.
There's some shows that'll get at it, right? Like I remember feeling that way with Lost, and knowing they had no idea what they were doing, and that was actually the fun of the show. Yeah, there is that kind of a, sometimes I think in our culture, our American culture, we have a lot of difficulty with uncertainty and with not being able to control things. Yeah,
the word
country of control freaks.
Yeah, right. And the word that's coming to mind is wild, like the wildness.
Yeah,
like there's a wildness to the kind of storytelling that K-drama does, that you're describing in the book, at least from like my American vantage. Like there's like our storytelling tends to be more restrictive or something by comparison in terms of like what's possible on the screen and how plots unfold, and like how elements of magic or magical realism might be introduced. Or do you know what I'm getting at? Like I just like, there's not as much sense of play or something too often. And again, yeah. I have to flag that my diet as a consumer of television, like I haven't seen so much. Like I don't see anything usually. I'm so doing this and reading books, and I'm in that channel. So I'm not the culture vulture, that a lot of people are, I therefore like don't have maybe the best perspective on it all, but just feels that way, based on my limited diet.
Yeah, maybe it's like in the world, right? Like cultures that believe in ghosts, or like, things. There's something in the book where it's like one of the characters in one of the K-dramas I made up can see ghosts, and none of the villagers like think that's weird because they think ghosts exist and they're all around us. And the only weird thing is that one person can see them. Not that ghosts are weird. And so like you just kind of, some other cultures, maybe you're living in a place where mystery is just like a more natural part of life. Or like broader mystery. I mean, I think we have a lot of mystery here, but a lot of it is so funneled into religion and like the ability or the desire for religion to explain that mystery in one single and easily digestible way. And maybe that's different, even like a culture with multiple gods, or, mysticism, or, like animal gods or something.
So where are you on religion? You got anything?
I grew up super Catholic. I think we talked about this once on the podcast. My parents are like, super Catholics, right? My dad was going to become a priest when he married my mom. And so I grew up going to church every week, praying and thinking that hell was a real place. Heaven was a real place. God is like a white dude with a beard. And now I just think, man, those things seem so ridiculous to me now. I actually believe in God still, but it's not a person. I think it's contradictory to think that God is a person and then to say that God is like beyond our understanding, right?
Right.
Omnipotent. Like that's not a person. It's definitely not a white dude with a beard.
No. Yeah.
And so I'm trying to get across to my kids too that like, maybe it would be, even if we just took the teachings at face value, they wouldn't lead to the places where religion seems to take them to. I reread The Color Purple a couple of years ago, and then I listened to it on audio too. And in the audiobook version I had, Alice Walker does the introduction to the book. And what she says is, it must be like a 20 or 30 anniversary book, or something like that. She says, people have read this book in all kinds of different ways, but no one seems to read it the way that I intended it. And it's a book about God. It starts, Dear God, and it ends with God, and nobody reads it about God. I thought, holy, like I had never thought of it that way either. But if you start thinking of it that way, you see that it's all placed entirely throughout the book. And she talks about how her idea of God is just like a kind of like energy and all of the living things. And that's kind of what I believe in now. That like there's God in us, there's God in the air, there's God in, the trees and rocks or whatever. But definitely whatever it is, it doesn't look like us.
Yeah. Let's hope not.
We're never really fun.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a passage in The Color Purple. I wish I could recite it, but it has something to do with how this, feeling like if you cut a tree open, I don't know, I'm going to fuck it up. I shouldn't even go there, but I think that Alice Walker is good on that subject, and it's kind of like, there's something sort of heartbreaking and funny about writing this masterpiece with this like intent. And then like, even though everybody sort of loves it, nobody understands that was your intent.
Right. Yeah. Even when you started, Dear God.
Yeah. I'm like, in the book that I'm working on, there are little sections where I'm like the narrator's, imagining his future grandchildren, like what he would tell them or whatever. We'll see if this makes it into the final book, but there's one line or one section where he's trying to sort of advise them on this sort of thing. And the only thing he can come up with is like, everything is weirder than it seems. And I kind of feel like that's my stance, it's like this living in uncertainty and maybe humility. I don't fucking know what's going on. Nobody knows. Like we have we've gotten some ideas and there've been some good teachers and some good insights, but let's like pump the brakes on having it all locked down. I think that's a bit absurd. And even in my lifetime, our lifetime, this notion of hell being a real place and mortal sins, for people who are not fluent in Catholicism, when I was a kid, it was taught to me that there were sins that you could commit for which there was no forgiveness. And like you would burn for eternity in a fiery hell with a demon lizard named Satan who had a pitchfork. I mean,
demon lizard
or whatever the fuck. I mean, it's like, it's insane to believe that, first of all, but especially to tell that to children. And again, Brad Listi with his middle of the road intelligence as a child, like I believed my elders.
Oh, I believed it too.
Yeah. I mean, I had an adult telling me something. It could have been anything. I was an earnest kid who was like, okay. And, I could apply this to things that go beyond religion, but, like just say no culture. There was a period of my youth where I was like, oh my God, like if you do any drugs, like you're dead, and, all this stuff, very impressionable, and like maybe not thinking as well or as independently as I should have been. But, you get to that eventually.
Maybe that's what we're getting out of books and writing is the trust in the mysterious or belief in the mysterious, or even just the acknowledgement that there is so much mystery and that it's not a bad thing, that things can be mysterious, and we don't have to like figure out every single thing in the universe or have some kind of story that explains every single thing in the universe. And sometimes I think this about science. It's like, it's nice. I like all the science stuff, but sometimes it would be cool if it's just a weird mystery and we spent the money on like, solving homelessness or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, science too, I feel like sometimes there's similar like dogmatic attitudes about it, where it feels like, it's kind of presented to us as though we've hit some sort of terminus. I think of this in particular with regard to astrophysics.
Yeah, all the coolest stuff in astrophysics is the stuff we don't know, right? It's like dark matter and stuff.
Yeah, but like sometimes it's like, oh yeah, it's like the Big Bang, and I don't know, man. That's a really tough one for me to swallow. I know there's like some sort of consensus on it, but I'm just like, really? It was all like the size of a that's way beyond my little brain. So anyway, man, I could keep going and love talking with you, and I know you got to go get your kids, so I'm going to let you go. I want to say again how happy I am for you in this new gig at Columbia, the life in New York, your kids getting to grow up as like Manhattanites. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And kudos to you for enduring all that you've had to endure and just continuing to make books and to do the work. It's inspiring, and it's an example, I think, to the rest of us who have maybe had to endure less and have struggled more to get work done. So kudos to you.
We all got our own problems.
Yeah, ultimately, right? But I don't know. Congrats on the sense of wonder, the reception that it's gotten, and thanks so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you so much, Brad.